So with that, Mr. President, I would like to turn to another subject. My colleague, Senator Udall from New Mexico, was out here earlier, I believe, or maybe he's coming later this afternoon, to remember the honoring this past Sunday of the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Native Women and Girls. This is an important day to recognize because this issue has become an epidemic in the United States. Last year, the Seattle Indian Health Board released a report that examined the number of murdered and missing Native women in urban areas where 71% of Native Indians and Alaska Natives reside. So these are urban centers in which they found at least 506 cases of murdered and Indigenous women and girls in 71 cities. 128 were missing, 280 were murdered. The report found that Washington State had one of the highest numbers of cases of murdered and missing Native American women, and two of my state's largest cities, Seattle and Tacoma, are in the top 10 nationwide of the highest number of cases. Seattle ranks number 1. So we are experiencing this crisis, and it is time that this report be a wake-up call to action. We can no longer ignore these huge numbers, but we need to find answers. One of the answers is in the legislation sponsored by my colleague Senator Murkowski from Alaska, Savannah's Act, which will improve the response of local and state and federal tribal enforcement cases of missing and murdered tribal women and girls. This is so important, and that is why I have joined Senator Murkowski and Senator Cortez Masto as a co-sponsor of this legislation, and am urging that the Senate pass it immediately. Right now, hours and days can be wasted in responding to this. Savannah's Act will streamline the protocols and process between our tribes and law enforcement agencies, which means swifter action and a more rapid pace. Why am I bringing this up now? I know we also have to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, but this legislation has good bipartisan support in the United States Senate. We can pass this legislation very soon and send it over to the House of Representatives. That way, it is ready to be put into the hands of our law enforcement if it passes and goes to the President's desk for signature. A tool that can be used now, not delayed another 7 or 8 months until we get the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. So I thank my former colleague, Senator Heitkamp, for trying to push this legislation at the end of last congressional session. I hope that my colleagues will realize that the great bipartisan support that existed in the United States Senate to move this legislation still exists. What is different now is a House of Representatives who are very willing to take up and pass Savannah's Act, and we should do that as soon as possible. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.